grammar. Here we're going to get a lot more academic-y, okay? And I'm starting with the assumption that you've been taught grammar at some point. I'm not saying you have to have it perfect, but I'm starting with the assumption that you have a basic working knowledge of grammar. And I'm going to be explaining it different than you've heard it explained, okay? It's my experience that if you, for example, were to write down all the rules for commas, you're going to have a lot of rules. And that's not really how language was made. Language was made kind of like people who figured out the grammar kind of did it after they listened to people talk, okay? So there's more of a supporting structure than an all-dominating thing. We don't always look at it that way, but that's how a language evolves, okay? So grammar is really the glue that puts parts of sentences together. And that's how we want to talk about it. It's a way to distinguish different parts of sentences that should be distinguished and to glue them together. A lot of times we start gluing parts of sentences together that don't need to be glued. You know, you're putting in too much punctuation, or we leave things out. So the best way to understand punctuation is to understand parts of sentences, which is probably not how you were taught. Okay? So if we can figure out parts of sentences first, then we can go ahead and figure out what grammar to use. So I'm going to be talking a lot about parts of sentences. There are two parts. Well, we'll get through it. Okay, so what's a sentence? A sentence has at least one independent clause. Now, a sentence can have more than one independent clause. You can have an independent clause, a phrase, and a dependent clause. But in order to be a sentence, you have to have one independent clause. Sometimes on the reading test, especially if it's like Charlotte Bronte, she has sentences with 7 or 8 clauses. It's funny. She loves her semicolons. But for all our purposes, for your purposes, a sentence has one independent clause, okay? What's an independent clause? Well, it's a clause that stands on its own. It's independent. It's not dependent on another clause, okay? Well, okay, so then what's a dependent clause? A dependent clause is a clause that needs an independent clause. A dependent clause will have a subordinating conjunction. There are a lot of subordinating conjunctions, a lot of them. You don't need to memorize them, okay? As you can see here, there are a lot of them. For your purpose, I want you to think of a subordinating conjunction as a word like because. What's a subordinating conjunction? It's a word like because, okay? Because is the most common subordinating conjunction. Oops. So just think it's a word like because, all right? Well, okay, we have independent clauses and dependent clauses. Well, what's a clause? A lot of people don't know what clauses are, okay? A clause has a subject and a finite verb, so we need to talk about both of those. The subject can be implied, okay? The most common implied subject is the command form with you as a subject. You, my dear reader, okay? A lot of informative pieces use the command form. You'll see it often in like the science passages. You know, they're like, consider the flowers or something like that. Or take the sample, okay? This is the command form, all right? When I was originally taught the grammar, when I was working at that tutoring center, they had us give an example, which I've never actually seen. I'm just going to share it with you right now because it might show up, but they just may have been wrong. I don't know. Just covering my bases. So the example I was taught, not the command form, which does show up, but the example I was taught was this sentence. Pi is widely understood. Okay, pi is the object of that sentence because it's the thing that's being understood. So who's doing it? well, the wide people in general, people in general, okay? So that, just keep a little asterisk by that in your mind. But if you can put a subject into a sentence, put a subject into the sentence. So if you can't find the subject, is it the command form? If it's not the command form, then choose one of the answers that put the subject in the sentence. If you literally can't do it, then is the subject extremely implied, like you knew exactly who it is, then you're probably okay. But the subject can be implied, but most of the time it's not. If you can put it in, okay? All right. Stop. Stop is a command form, okay? What is a finite verb? Okay, so you may think a finite verb is anything that's not the infinitive to verb. Yes, except there are other conjugations. There's other infinitive conjugations, okay? There's 3 of them. There's to farm, there's the gerund, farming, and there's farmed as in farmed field. I don't want you to worry about the third one. We're not going to talk about it because it's essentially an adjective. Okay? Just think of it as an adjective, all right? But you're going to be dealing with to farm and farming, okay? So if you have those and you don't have another verb, you're not dealing with a clause, okay? So what is the series of words that has meaning but isn't a clause? It's a phrase. I want you to think about a phrase this way. A phrase is a concept with more than one word, okay? A phrase is a concept with more than one word. If you can grasp what I'm saying here, your grammar on this test, your grammar score is going to go up significantly. Your ease on this test is going to go up significantly. Start thinking about phrases as concepts with more than one word. It's essentially functioning as a word. We just needed more than one word to say it. Okay? Well, what's a word? It's a concept. Let's look at some examples. Phrases and words. Okay, so this should be bluish green. Let's say I forgot the word teal. So I said, that color, bluish green. That's essentially the same thing as teal, right? But or turquoise, but it's 2 words instead of 1. So it's not, it's functioning as a word, okay? That guy over there is a prepositional phrase. We're not going to go into much about prepositional phrases, but that is a prepositional phrase. It means Bob. We just don't know Bob's name yet, okay? Under the table, that actually doesn't have a word, but it functions as a place, and a place is a noun. It's a concept, right? People who run, we should say runners. Mom and dad, parents. Bob and Sue, they. Let's say if you look up prepositional phrase, all the grammar sites say, on top of Old Smokies, and I'm going to have to live a prepositional phrase. We could go on top of Old Smoky, write a town charter, and call it Smoketown. Okay, so sometimes a phrase is something we don't know the word to, or maybe we don't yet have a word to. We never will, but it functions as a word. Running quickly, sprinting. Dancing in the street. Dancing in the street is the quintessential example. Again, if you look up the difference between a phrase and a clause, a lot of people use dancing in the street as an example because we have a noun and a verb. So a lot of people who think a clause is a noun and a verb will say dancing in the street is a clause. It is not. That is an infinite verb in dancing. And it doesn't say who's dancing. So the street is not the subject of the sentence. Okay, who's doing the dancing? I don't know. Okay. Dancing in the street is a verb phrase. Street dancing. Okay, now you can see street dancing doesn't pass my spell checker. It's not really a word, but you know what I mean. Okay. You're never going to put a comma inside of a word. Don't put it inside of a phrase. You're not going to write teal, T-E, comma, T-E, comma, A-L. Don't write blue, green, okay? It should be bluish green. Now, you're not going to see bluish green on your test, but you might see something like charcoal gray, light pink. Something that it's not necessarily that we don't know the word to. It's just that they're distinguishing the color a little bit more, okay? Snowy white, right? Pale yellow. Something like that is probably what you're going to see, okay? let's say you're like, okay, well, I understand the bluish green as a phrase, but what about warm winter? Okay. Those are two technically different. Warm is a temperature and winter is a season, right? I get it. Okay. Well, if you're not sure if that's two adjectives or one adjective phrase, check to see with a comma. So if you could say warm and winter, you have two adjectives. And that doesn't sound right. Warm and winter doesn't sound right. Warm and winter, what? So it's warm winter coat. Okay? So if you can put an and between something, you have a different phrase. That's a huge help to figuring out what your phrases are. Okay? We do put a comma when we have something nested, like Chicago, Illinois. Okay, but there are technically two concepts. It's just that Chicago is inside of Illinois. Think of like a Venn diagram where one is around the other. Okay, so let's look at this sentence. The ingredients for the salad were marshmallows, vanilla pudding, sliced apples, and sliced Snickers bars. Okay, great. As you can see, we have 4 ingredients for this salad. Someone literally gave me this salad once when that tutoring center was in Minnesota. Someone's like, here, have a Snickers salad. And I was like, that's not a salad, that is a dessert. Okay, the ingredients for the salad are marshmallows, vanilla pudding, sliced apples, and sliced Snickers bars. Okay, so you can see here that 3 of these ingredients are phrases. Vanilla pudding, sliced apples, sliced Snickers bars. One of them is a word, marshmallows. But they're all conceptually ingredients, okay? Now, the Oxford comma is the one that I've highlighted there. The Oxford comma is the last comma in a series. Some people say you don't need the Oxford comma. I disagree with them, but they make compelling points. There are points. We're not going to go into their points, but I'm going to tell you both the SAT and the ACT are in the Oxford comma side. And so you will be tested on the Oxford comma. Use the Oxford comma. Why? Because the Oxford comma helps us understand the difference between a sentence and an appositive. So an appositive is when we give more context, bonus information about the word we said before it. So like, I love my parents and their names are Kyle and Susie. Kyle and Susie would be an appositive phrase. I love my parents, comma, Kyle and Susie. But what if I was telling you a series of people I love? John is my sister, John is my brother, and Lisa is my sister. I love my parents, comma, John, comma, and Lisa. You see the difference? Okay? So the Oxford comma helps us figure out which are series and which are appositive phrases. Okay? All right, let's say we had people who run are fit. Okay. Are we going to offset who run in commas? Well, if another way you can check that is to remove it from the sentence. If you can offset someone in commas, unless it's in a series, you can remove it from a sentence. Okay, people are fit. That's missing a lot there, right? Really, they should have said runners are fit, but they didn't. They said people who run are fit. Okay? So when we remove who run, it's a significantly different subject than people. So people who run is very different than people. So that means, okay, the subject phrase is people who run, okay? However, if I did my sister who runs is fit or my sister who runs is fit, you may say, well, that's like the same like setup. Yeah, but my sister doesn't fundamentally change if we put in who runs or remove it. Okay, my sister stays the same person, okay? The President of the United States, Joe Biden, is grinning. Actually, this is how I know how long I've been tutoring because I've had to change this sentence twice now. When I first made this document, it was the President of the United States, Barack Obama, is playing basketball, okay? And then it was President of the United States, Donald Trump, is tweeting, and now it's grinning. Okay, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, is grinning, okay? Or is it the President of the United States, comma, Joe Biden, comma, is grinning? You may say, but Lydia, I know who the President of the United States is. You don't need to say the name. Okay, fair. But whereas in this case, it fundamentally changes when you put in who run, and this doesn't. I get that. But the President of the United States is Joe Biden, okay? So that is, it's not who happens to be Joe Biden. It's this president in particular is grinning. So a name that follows a title does not get offset in commas. However, a title that follows a name does. Joe Biden, comma, the President of the United States, comma, is grinning. Now, this can get a little bit confusing. Okay, so like if I were to say, the Dean of Students is responsible for enrollment. Okay, fine. If I were to add the name of the Dean of Students, Sarah Smith, is responsible for enrollment. In that case, it doesn't matter who the dean is still responsible for enrollment. Okay? So if Sarah Smith was replaced by a different dean, then it would still be the same thing. So in that case, Sarah Smith is bonus information. But if I were to say the Dean of Students, Sarah Smith, is giving a speech, it's a little different. That's Sarah Smith, who happens to be the dean, is the one giving the speech. Okay? So if you're talking about a role, and then you take the name of the person who's currently in that role, offset the name in commas. But if you're talking about a person who happens to occupy the role, and the person is doing the thing, then no commas. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Once you get it, I find that you get it. But I know a lot of my students are just like, always offset names and commas. And that's not correct. It's just not, okay? I'm taking my son to the doctor, Kyle Terry, for a checkup. Now, in this case, I just said title, name, no commas, but doctor isn't functioning as a title here. We can remove Kyle Terry from the sentence and it's fine. I'm taking my son to the doctor for a checkup. Local pediatrician Kyle Terry is retiring. Well, in this case, the pediatrician is Kyle Terry. It's not just the role of pediatrician. So in that case, no commas. Notice what I did here. I gave you an example and an exception. Example, exception, example, exception. Phrases are hard. This is the hardest part of grammar. Phrases are hard. Okay, knowing what a phrase is, knowing how to treat it, and what to do with the commas around it is the hardest part of commas. If you look back at any mistake you've made, especially if it's commas, more often than not, you are dealing with a phrase. So if you, instead of memorizing all the rules for commas, if you really start trying from here on out to think about what your phrases are, you're going to do a lot better. Things are going to make more sense to you. You can't figure out where your commas go until you figure out your phrases and your clauses. You got to figure out your phrases and your clauses, but most importantly, you have to figure out your phrases because phrases can make up clauses. So if you can figure out your phrases, so they're just words with more than one word, your score is absolutely going to go up. That is the hardest part, okay?